Hi there, booktube. It's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and today I'm going to do a little discussion on books that formed the way I read, books that shape the way I read, formative reading experiences. I've got quite a list here, and unfortunately a lot of it is American, but I tend to move towards American literature. I find it quite an interesting part of reading. So let's get into it. It all started actually back in 2008. My year 10 English teacher gave us this book to read. Before that, I was a bit of a reader. I like to read casually, not as much as I do now. And the book was so awful. We were supposed to do a book report on it, and I gave it this scathing review, and it turned me off reading for about 6 years. So from 2008 till the end of 2013, I didn't read at all. That's how bad this book was that was given to us in high school. But then during that time period, I sort of became a bit of a cinephile, just following all these different directors and getting into their work. One director in particular was by the name of Paul Thomas Anderson. I watched all of his stuff from Boogie Nights and Hard Eight all the way through to the recent one at the time, which was The Master. And I thought he could do no wrong. So what's his next film going to be? And I find out it's going to be this movie called Inherent Vice, which I actually really like. I actually think it's an amazing film, so there's that. But then I looked into it and I found out that it's based on a book by Thomas Pinchot, who's considered one of the greatest living authors. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe it's a way to get back into reading. So I went to my local bookstore just down the road, got them to order it in, and the first book in 5-6 years was Inherent Vice by Thomas Pinchot, my first reintroduction into reading. I actually don't remember anything from this book at all. I do intend to reread it. I just remembered that it was the funniest thing I'd ever read. And this author pretty much got me into his work, but here's the thing. I actually stopped reading again after that for another 3 years. So technically, from 2008 to 2016, I read one book in the space of 8 years. Complete reading lull. And then towards the end of 2016, something clicked in my brain. I don't know what it was, but something told me to start reading again. So I went out and I asked around what a good starting point was. I looked up, what was considered good literature, what was considered the best of all time. Authors a lot of writers respect and have considered quite formative in their experiences. And one that kept popping up was Ernest Hemingway. So the author that technically actually got me back into reading all the way through to today, 6 years later, was Hemingway. Unfortunately, recently I read To Have and Have Not by him, which I think was one of the worst books I've ever read. So maybe I don't feel the same way about his work now. If I return to these books I'm about to show you now, maybe I'll have a different idea about them. But at the time, I thought this is what got me back into reading. So it all started with A Farewell to Arms. Wonderful story, very well written. Again, it's terse, and you've heard the whole thing about the iceberg theory, about the way he writes. Very to the point, snappy sentences. Wonderful story. After that, I read Fiesta, The Sun Also Rises. Here's one thing I will say about Hemingway. He knows how to write a good ending. I think all four of these books that I read in a space of a month, actually, that's how much I got back into reading, had fantastic endings. The big one, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is probably my favorite Hemingway book out of the four. I really, really like this book. It took me about 2 weeks to read it. There are some people who say, well, you can read it in a few days, but this is me getting back into reading, so it was a whole new experience for me. But for me, 2 weeks was considered quite a lot to get through a 500-page book. The last one was The Old Man and the Sea, which I read in 2 days. So yeah, I read A Farewell to Arms in 1 week, Fiesta in 1 week, For Whom the Bell Tolls in just shy of 2 weeks, and then 2 days I read The Old Man and the Sea. So that was considered my Hemingway month. And after that, I bought everything by him. I bought his complete short story collection. I bought To Have and Have Not. I bought the one that everyone says is bad, Across the River, Across the Trees into the River, or something like that. Apparently it's god awful, but I bought it. And I bought, Islands in the Stream and all the ones he did, all the ones that were released after he died. So Hemingway got me back into reading. After that, I sort of went down this whole rabbit hole. I was like, okay, well, who did Hemingway inspire? Who were Hemingway's competitors, people that rode around the same time as Hemingway? That's where I found out about Faulkner, and from Faulkner I found out about a living writer. I was like, well, I better read a living writer who was inspired by these guys, and that led me to Cormac McCarthy. That's right. I started with Blood Meridian, and I've told people not to start with Blood Meridian, but here I am. I started with Blood Meridian, and it shook me to my very soul. This is an evil book, and I mean that in the best possible sense. It's probably the best book ever, the best book written in the 20th century. But to this day, no other book has sort of screwed itself into my mind and kept on just relaying messages, replaying scenes, just constantly haunting me. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm always doing research about this book, and that's how much it affected me. It's a brutal, brutal book, but it's brilliantly well written. And it was quite a shock going from something like Hemingway, which was sort of easy to understand, to Blood Meridian, which is this whole other level. I mean, you got so many $1,000 words, so many words I had no idea what they were, so I had to go and look them up. And I sort of came to the conclusion that I probably started with the wrong book with this author, that I probably should have started with one that everyone's read, which is The Road or No Country, which eventually I did read. But as time has progressed, I have come to realize just how masterful Blood Meridian is as a piece of American literature. It truly is a masterful piece of work. From Blood Meridian, I went and dived into some of his other works. So then I read, as I said before, I read No Country for Old Men. Then I read Child of God. Then I read All the Pretty Horses. And what I saw was a bit of a downward slope. And by that, I mean, none of his books were bad, although I do find one of them to be a bit average, and I'll talk about that one in a second. But it's like I started with his best book and it just went downward from there. But that was until I reached Suttree. Suttree was the 5th book I think I read by him, which was I read about a year after Blood Meridian. And to this day, it's one of the greatest reading experiences of my life. People still consider this one the best book. Sure, I'll agree with that. But in terms of reading experiences, I'm going off Suttree. It just really turned me on to the way things are written, how things are projected, how you interpret things. It's such a well-written and well-structured and well-crafted piece of work. Very, very Faulknerian with a bit of Flannery O'Connor mixed in. But if you can get past the hideousness of it, there's beauty there, and there's humor, and the whole idea of the main character Cornelius Suttree just going through those 4 years that the book takes place in Knoxville, Tennessee, with humor and dignity. It's one of the greatest things I've ever read. It truly is a wonderful piece of work. I highly recommend it. But then after Suttree, I read Outer Dark. And that to me is the low point of McCarthy's career. Not that it's a bad book or anything. I liked it. I just think it dips a bit with that book there. Maybe I just didn't get it at the time. Maybe I should revisit it. And that means I actually haven't read his first book, The Orchard Keeper, and I'm scared. I actually am scared to read it because I'm worried that I will end things on a low, at least until the new books come out, which I'm really looking forward to. So we went from Hemingway to Blood Meridian, Cormac Mccarthy. So then I thought, okay, well then, who did Cormac Mccarthy inspire? What other authors out there who are younger or were inspired by them to write their own thing and are considered in their own genre a master of literature? And that led me to David Foster Wallace, Not Infinite Jest, Girl with Curious Hair. Short story collection, his first short story collection, published in the 80s. I only remember a couple of stories from this, including the last one, which takes its title from Gravity's Rainbow, of all things. I didn't find that out until I read the line in Gravity's Rainbow. But I thought it was a very fascinating short story collection and very well articulated and even just a tad complex, even though it's his earlier stuff, so it's not quite as complex as his later stuff. So from Girl with Curious Hair, I decided, well, all right, I'm going to try Infinite Jest then. And boy, did I fail at that. I got 240 pages into the damn thing, put it down for 2 weeks and picked it up thinking I could get back into it and realized that I fucked up immeasurably. It's not a book you should put down for a long period of time and then pick up again. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea how to get back into that rhythm of reading. So I put it aside and decided that in order to get more prepared for Infinite Jest, in order to be able to understand the language and get into the mind of David Foster Wallace, I should probably expand my scope with his work, get a bit more formative with his reading, with his bibliography. So I went and read some of his essays. I went and read his novel Pale King, which to this date, even though Infinite Jest is technically better, the Pale King has better writing. I will argue on that. Now, after all that, I went back and reread Infinite Jest. It took me about 2 months. I took my time with it. And that was the first book, the first tome I ever read in my life. Yeah. And boy, was it a good one to start with. It really, really expanded the way I view things. So many memories of reading that book. And frustrations as well. It's a very frustrating read. But that changed. Infinite Jest changed everything. It really did. But I have this book to thank for getting me into David Foster Wallace, for getting me into Infinite Jest. This is the one to thank. I do intend on reading a couple of short stories in here again, because I think the first 4 stories in this one, including one involving a game show, were quite instrumental in getting me to the point that I am as a reader. So we have Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, David Foster Wallace. So then I thought, I'll go back to like the 50s and read some of the writing that was going on with American literature in the 50s. And that led me to J.D. Salinger with Franny and Zoe, Jack Kerouac with Big Sur, and Hunter S. Thompson with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Although technically this one was from, published in 1970, but I'll count it among these lot anyway. 3 slim reads. You could read these in a short period of time if you want to. I certainly did. To this day, I still think, I read a few Jack Kerouac books, but I still think Big Sur is the best thing he's written. And yes, I'm also including the Dumber Bums and On the Road in that thought process. But I think the way it details his mental deterioration during that final night where he's out in the woods, out at Big Sur, is absolutely amazing. He was a good writer. I can see why some people don't like it, but I thought it was quite fascinating. So yeah, Big Sur. J.D. Salinger. I've read everything by J.D. Salinger except Catcher in the Rye, and that's because a good friend of mine tried to read Catcher in the Rye and said it was god awful, so it put me off reading it. So I thought, well, I'll try everything else he's done, and that included 9 Stories, which has the amazing, probably one of my top 5 favorite short stories of all time, Perfect Day for Banana Fish. Truly amazing short story. If you want to read anything by J.D. Salinger, make sure it's that. I think you'll get an idea into his ideas and all that sort of thing through that short story. Brutal ending, but very, very well worth reading. But the one I'm going to stick with, Franny and Zoe, because it has this whole thing about a brother and a sister, and me and my younger sister, we grew up, and yeah, it really resonated with me. But about the Glass family that Salinger, wrote a lot of his work around, or it's centered around. I found it to be, it almost reminded me of a play. It's almost structured like a play, this book. A lot of dialogue involved, a very clever, witty dialogue, but very good, very formative reading experience, this one, Franny and Zoe. And then the last one, obviously, I've never read anything like this, and probably never again will read anything like this. I went from reading Fear and Loathing to reading The Rum Diary, which I actually quite liked as well. A bit more fictional than this one here, but still quite a good experience. And then some of his other stuff as well, but I don't think any of it matches Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I still haven't read Hell's Angels, but I'll get to that one as well. Now, after that, I decided to get more into, Fear and Loathing basically introduced me to this whole gonzo style of writing. And I thought, okay, what other books out there are considered quite labyrinthine, gonzo, just so much chaos going on there? And one that kept popping up was this book called Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. So I went and read this one, keeping in mind that all the stuff here that I've read is from a long time ago. This was 2016, 2017. This is my 1 year of formative reading. This 1 year is what produced everything that I read since then, pretty much. Catch-22 is a wonderful book. It's very confusing for the first 140 pages, but then once you get into onto its wavelength, it's quite a good fun and at times even depressing read. The last third of this book gets pretty dark indeed, especially when characters start dying off in certain ways. But I still consider it amongst the top 5 books I've ever read in my life. Will it still remain that way 10 years down the track? Who knows? Maybe things will change. Some of the books I've read this year will certainly put that up to the challenge. This has been quite a good reading year actually for me, but as it stands, this was one of those formative reading experiences. I really liked Catch-22. I haven't read his other book, Something Happened, but I hear that one's quite good as well. So yeah, Catch-22. Then, obviously, with all this being American, I thought I should expand my scope, so I decided to look overseas for different books. I couldn't find any author in Australia that seemed interesting to read. Tried Europe, so the Bronte sisters, Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. I got halfway through both of those, put them down. Not that they were bad or anything, I just didn't continue reading them. But then I went into more the Asian literature section, and that's where I came across two authors from Japan. The first one is Haruki Murakami. This was the first book I read by him, Norwegian Wood. Quite a fascinating story. His writing style is a bit, it just gets to the point. There's nothing flowery or complex or even impressive about it. But what you find with Haruki Murakami is it's more about the storytelling and how he goes by telling that story, pretty much. Norwegian Wood is quite... I'll go and say it's probably the best thing I've read by him. And I recently read Drive My Car, the short story. And straight after this one here, I read After Dark, which incorporates a little bit more of a magical realism, mystical type element to it. Apparently, he's quite good at doing that with things like Kafka on the Shore, the One-Up Bird Chronicle, and all that sort of thing. But I think I tend to gravitate towards more his realism work. And that's probably why I liked Norwegian Wood so much. So when I read this, I thought, okay, well, what are other Japanese authors that are out there that have that interesting writing style that held in high regard? And that's where I came across Yukio Mishima. I don't have the book with me, but it's called The Sailor Who Fell from Grace of the Sea. Wonderful short book. Mishima, I think, is more, if anything, his personal life is just as interesting as his work, and he's quite an interesting figure in not just in literature but in general. Just some of his personal ideals, just how politically aligned he was. If you actually watch some of the interviews with him, I think he's a better English speaker than most of the English speaking people I know. I mean, and English was his third language after, I think, obviously Japanese, and I think French was the other language. But if you just close your eyes and listen to him speaking Japanese, you couldn't tell he was Japanese. He's wonderfully articulate. He's incredibly intelligent. I have Confessions by Mars, but I haven't read that yet either. So yeah, I got into Japanese literature. Another one is Shusaku Endo's Silence. I got about halfway through that one there, and that is quite well put together as well. Very, very good. All of that leads to this book here, which I read 2 years ago. And this here began the new era of reading and what I became interested in reading, which was a lot of postmodern and just tome-heavy and idea-heavy books. And that's this thick, heavy bastard, Gravity's Rainbow, Thomas Pinchot. I actually read a few of his other stuff before I got to this one here, so obviously Inherent Vice from many years ago. But then I read The Crying of Lot 49, Vineland, and his short story collections, and I thought, okay, well, I should be ready to go. And I read it. I did it. I read it in about a month, and while I still don't understand everything, I don't think anyone can understand everything. It just like Catch-22 and just like Infinite Jest will go down as amongst the greatest reading experiences of my life. This is a formative reading experience for me. This introduced a whole new area of literature for me. Through this, I was able to come across people like William Gaddis and just a whole host of other authors, some of whom have been sort of underground authors. The way this is written, the complexity of it, the many allusions going on in the book. When I was reading this, I didn't realize this was possible. So this really blew my mind. It really did. It's a wonderful book, and I really like this cover as well. I was quite happy when this one came in. So yeah, absolutely wonderful. I do intend on rereading this one day, although I will get to Mason and Dixon next. And then I thought, well, I better end it with talking about two recent authors I read this year who I thought were quite wonderful. They're both female authors, actually. The first one is Flannery O'Connor. I'd never read Flannery O'Connor before, and there's quite a few people out there who highly recommended her, especially considering it's Southern Gothic literature, and I quite like Southern Gothic literature, so I went and read the short stories A Good Man Is Hard to Find and Everything That Rises Must Converge. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. A Good Man Is Hard to Find is a fantastic short story. And then I went and read Wise Blood, which was pretty good as well. I really want to read The Violent Buried Away, although it's quite hard to get my hands on. And then the other one is Joan Didion, The White Album. I read this one, I think, a year and a half ago. And up until 2021, I thought David Foster Wallace was the greatest essay writer alive, and boy was I wrong. The White Album contains some of the greatest essays I've ever read in my life. She is so good. She is the queen of California. I've read her fiction book, Play It As It Lays. I've read a few of the other essays, and now I'm currently reading her book, her memoir, Blue Nights, which is very sad. It's almost like a hollow shell of the person that she once was. Very, very interesting. But these two proved formative reading experiences for me. They introduced me to, obviously more women authors. I don't normally do that. I don't normally read women authors. I should really get into that. Through these people here, I thought, well, I should start getting more into it. So I went and got some Margaret Atwood books, and I'm going to continue reading some more Flannery O'Connor and definitely some Joan Didion. So I'm trying to expand my horizons here. But there we go. These are just a small slice of some of the books that pretty much expanded my view of literature. Just what books that got me back into reading, books that showed me how to think, how to interpret. And from these books, I was able to think like a spider web of just other things going on. Just through these, I was able to read and read and read. It's been a good year. I'm glad I got back into reading. And I'll be posting a lot more videos as well, unlike before. But as it stands, these are the books that shaped the way I read, and hopefully you like some of them. I know I sure as hell did, except for maybe Hemingway. I probably should go back and read and make sure I still like him. But yeah, that's it. Thanks very much. See ya. Bye.